Hi, everyone. My name's Tammy. For those of you that don't know me, I am a women's health physio and I work in a private practice clinic at Strive Sports and Health with Richard, who you've probably seen on here before. Just a bit of background for myself. I've worked a lot in the sports space as well as women's health. So those are my two passions, sports and women's health. I've had a bit of history. I've done about 6 odd years in male baseball in Australia, so with the Sydney Blue Sox, and helped to help the girls out for the Team Emeralds in their World Cup tournament in Canada about two odd years ago now. Holy crap, it's like 2 years. It's a long time. And now I'm the head physiotherapist at the Canterbury Bankstown Bulldogs for the NRLW team. So you'll see me running around in orange. I look like a carrot, but that's okay. But yeah, that's a bit of my background in terms of my passions and where I guess like pelvic floor and performance kind of stems from. And my ultimate goal is to empower females of, all walks of life, as well as, female athletes to better understand their bodies so that way they can kind of make more informed choices for themselves when it comes to their health, their exercise, and make sure that they're guided towards the right people and the right support if they need anything. So, yeah, let's
Do you go for the Bulldogs?
Sorry?
You go for the Bulldogs?
No, I go for para.
Yeah.
I grew up around the hills, so that was just the club that we supported. But my partner and his whole family support the Bulldogs, so it's a bit rough, but that's okay. It was a bit of a deal breaker to begin with, but that's okay. Yeah. We'll move past it. Alrighty, so we'll start on our pelvic floor and performance webinar tonight. So what's ahead? We'll go through what the pelvic floor is, pelvic floor and low back pain, pelvic floor and hip pain, just a quick self-assessment as to, when to actually look for, like what to look for, and whether or not it's actually related to your pelvic floor or whether or not it's something else, and who do I contact for help. So, and then we'll finish off with some Q&A if there is any. Okay. Alrighty. So the pelvic floor, more than just Kegels. So first of all, what I want to go through is allowing people to understand that the pelvic floor isn't just muscles, which a lot of people think it is. It is a group of muscles, ligaments, and fascia that kind of sit at the bottom of the pelvis, like a little bit of a hammock. So they go from your tailbone to your pubic bone. Now, this isn't just in females, it's also in males as well. The structure is in terms of where the muscles tend to sit. It's just a little bit different from males to males for obvious reasons. Now, you've got, talking about the muscles though, you've got 2 layers of pelvic floor muscles. You've got your deep layer that helps to support your pelvic organs, so your bladder, your uterus, your rectum, and as well as provide a little bit more of that core support as well, which we'll kind of deep dive into a little bit later. The superficial, so the second layer is the superficial layer, and that keeps everything shut so you don't leak yourself. And there's a common misconception when it comes to continence and or incontinence that your pelvic floor is weak. But there is just so many other reasons as to why you could be incontinent. So that's something that we can dive into a little bit later as well. But it's really important to understand that just because you leak doesn't mean you have a weak pelvic floor. Okay. And just because you've had a kid or you might have had like a one-off incident where you have leaked yourself, it doesn't mean that you have a weak pelvic floor. There's definitely so much more that goes into determining whether or not it is weak or not. But yes, so your pelvic floor works along with your core muscles. Now, when I say core, I mean abdominal in this situation. So your pelvic floor muscles work in unison or coordinate with your abdominal muscles, with your back, with pretty much the rest of your body to help to stabilize and provide stability through the pelvis as well as your trunk. Okay, so in the next slide, I will go into some core-based stuff where your pelvic floor does actually contribute quite a lot. And I'll actually stand up and I'll demonstrate a few different movements and how you can actually determine whether or not it's the pelvic floor that's being used or whether or not it's actually the deeper core. And it's not something that you need to do an internal to actually determine. So big thing, just a key thing, that the pelvic floor is really, really important for stability. Okay. Management of like your continence and being able to support all your pelvic organs, as well as breath control, and also being able to control how you brace when you train as well. Excuse me. But yes, so it's not just in pregnancy. Your pelvic floor comes into play in everything that you do. So on that, we'll move on to this nice little image here. Now, the reason why I want to show this is so that way you have a visual of what your pelvic floor muscles actually are. So the top one here, that's your deeper layer of your pelvic floor. Okay. Now, I want everyone to pay close attention to where the muscles attach into. Okay, you can see that they actually attach all around the pelvis, into the sacrum, into your two, sorry, into the two iliums as well. And then when you look at the superficial muscles here, again, they attach all the way across and into each separate, like each part of that pubic circle that you do have, that everyone does have. Now, this is just the pelvic floor. And that's like the deepest layer of the pelvis. Then you want to look at just here and here. That's kind of where your deeper like hip rotators will sit, and then your glutes will go on top of that. So if you think about how closely the body is linked, you want to look at how, like, you know, in terms of layers, if one's going to be tight, the other's going to get tight, and the top layer is going to get tight as well. So if something along those chains either works too hard or doesn't work enough, there are going to be compensations along that chain. And that's why whenever we look at the body, especially for me, especially for women, if they've, you know, if they have back pain, hip pain, or they train, I always check what their pelvic floor is doing. Are they actually activating it right? Is it involved in their bracing? Is it, are they even aware of it? Do they know how to turn it on? Or are they kind of mixing up between a squeeze and a relax or a push? Because a lot of people say that's your neutral pelvic floor muscles. Some women who think they're actually squeezing aren't actually squeezing, they're actually pushing. So for someone, for example, who power lifts or Olympic lifts, and you tell them to brace their core and to engage their pelvic floor, and they think they're engaging their pelvic floor by doing this, but actually they're doing a downward pressure, chances are they are most likely going to increase their risk of getting a prolapse, because there's a lot of pressure down, which then stretches out the ligaments that suspend your organs in place. And it's also going to stretch out and load the pelvic floor in that stretched out position as well. So that's the reason why whenever we look at a female athlete, or just a woman that trains and comes into the clinic with, you know, back pain, hip pain, whatever it may be, I always check the pelvic floor to make sure that they know how to differentiate the activation of the pelvic floor and the rest of their core muscles. Okay. All right. So now, before I mentioned a little bit about the core and how the pelvic floor is involved. Now, I usually like to talk about what we call the core canister or the core cylinder. Now, it's not just your abdominal muscles that make up the core. Your core is made up of 4 main muscles: pelvic floor, transversus abdominis, multifidus, and your diaphragm. So essentially makes it look like a bit of a cylinder or a canister, okay? And I want you to remember that with any part of the body, if one thing in a chain does not work, something else will compensate, okay? So all these muscles together, they essentially have to work in unison, and they work together to provide stability through the spine, through the pelvis, so that above and below, so your upper body and your lower body, have a stable base to work off. And then that way your body can actually get into positions where muscles can optimally engage and move. And that's how we make sure that movements are occurring more efficiently and effectively. So I'm going to stand up, and I'm actually going to kind of demonstrate the difference between a more of like a diaphragm brace, or more of a core brace, and more of a pelvic floor brace. Okay, so these are simple things that even, you know, for anyone that's watching that is, you know, just a gym goer, or even a PT or an allied health professional, like these are little things that you can actually have a look at to determine whether or not you or a client is, if whether or not they're actually activating through the right muscles, or if they're activating more from one. Okay, so I'm just going to stand up, and I'm just hoping that you guys will see me. Can you guys see that? Sorry.
Yeah, you're good.
Yep, cool. All right, cool. So, okay, so from here, this is more of a, I'm going to tuck that, and I'll do this first. So this is more of a diaphragm brace, okay? I'm going to go side on first. This is more of a diaphragm brace. And I'm going to let go. Diaphragm. And let go. Okay. One more. That's front on. Side on. Yeah. So you can kind of see that when someone braces more through their diaphragm, or they hold their breath and they brace more through their diaphragm, their chest just goes up. Yeah. Now, if they are bracing more from their pelvic floor, it's very, very subtle. So blink and you'll miss it. So when they brace more through their pelvic floor, this is what you're going to notice. This is pelvic floor. Nothing really moves. Yeah. From the front, nothing moves here. Yeah. Now, if they're bracing from their transversus abdominis, you're going to see this. Okay, and again. And again. Cool. Is that kind of like visually, can you kind of see the little differences between what's engaged more? If you brace through your diaphragm, your transversus abdominis, or your pelvic floor. Like with the pelvic floor, you're not going to see very much of a movement, or you might see a butt clench, right? Whereas with the transversus abdominis, you're going to actually see a slight tuck of the pelvis and a slight drawing of the belly button towards the spine, but upper body doesn't shift up. Yeah. And then if you're breathing and bracing through the diaphragm more, shoulders are going to go, chest and shoulders are going to go up a little bit. I'm exaggerating, but it goes up, and then nothing else below moves. Does that come?
What's the because I look, without being inappropriate, I know there's an easy way for a male to get their pelvic floor working. For females, what's the easiest way to get them more engaged with it, or teach them?
Teach them how to use their pelvic floor, sorry?
Yeah, correct.
Yep. So it's quite hard to, I guess, like to demonstrate externally how they actually can turn it on properly. But the best thing that I like to do is through breath. So if you get them to sit down on, let's say, like a massive fitness ball, or even just a chair or a bench, and get them to actually sit down. I'm just going to push this forward. Sorry. sit down on a chair like this, lean, and then like kind of put their elbows on their knees, so that way they can actually feel the pressure of the chair against their vagina. And you want them to actually take a deep breath, like take a deep belly breath, not a chest breath, but deep belly breath. And get them to imagine like when they inhale, they're filling up like a balloon, and that pressure against the chair increases. That's a lengthening. That's a push. When they exhale, it's like their pelvic floor is coming up, and everything's trying to push the air out, if that makes sense.
Yeah, fantastic. And would you say that like 2 or 3 minutes per day? Would they do it in the car? Would they do it pre-workout? How would you attack it?
Yeah, so in terms of like activating pelvic floor and doing pelvic floor exercises, I would be recommending firstly to make sure that they actually need to do it. Because a lot of the time I've seen a lot of clients come in and they're like, oh, I've got a weak pelvic floor. I've been given this and that to do so that I strengthen my pelvic floor. But really, they're actually so active that it makes it seem like they actually have a weak pelvic floor. So when I say that, I mean, think of your pelvic floor's ability to turn on, like contract, as like a bit of a spectrum. This is as much as it can contract, and this is as much as it can lengthen. Some women on testing might seem like they only have a little bit of a lift. Yeah. Is it because they're weak, or is it because they are so consistently on that they're so tight that they only have that much left to go? Yeah. So then it's kind of finding out whether or not they actually need it first, or whether or not you actually need to teach them how to lengthen and relax. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. Awesome.
Yeah. So that would probably be the main thing. And then in terms of prescription for exercises, I usually also, honestly, it just depends on the person in front of me. Sets, reps, all of that is going to change depending on what what the person in front of me is going to need. Based off what their goals are, where we need to get them back to. Sometimes I even get them doing it during a functional movement, because that's where they need to be strong, because at any other time, sitting, standing, walking, they're not feeling any issues. But then the moment, let's say, for example, they power lift, or they ollie lift, or they train, they get under a bar, and that's when it happens. That's where I'll actually get them to do their rehab. I'm not going to get them to just stand up or sit down and do it. I'm going to get them under the bar, and they're going to do their rehab under the bar, because it has to be functional. There is in a way a disconnect with the pelvic floor and whatever they're doing in that moment. So let's get them in that environment, and let's get them doing those exercises in that environment. Yep. Cool. Okay, so this is what I was saying before, bracing the pelvic floor. I've kind of demonstrated it before, but yes, we need to be a little bit more mindful with how people brace. And like I showed you before, like those were just the little things that you can actually look at visually to determine where they're bracing more from. The big thing that I know that I've worked with in terms of athletes is a lot of lifters who get taught to use a belt, but then push into the belt. And that's ideally not what we want, because when you give the cue of pushing into the belt, they actually bear down as well. And that's not what we want, especially for women who are at risk of prolapses, because that pushing outward pressure is actually a downward pressure on the pelvic floor as well, which essentially creates tension along the ligaments, as well as the fascia, and then eventually the pelvic floor. So we just want to be really mindful not to give the cue of pushing into the belt, or if that's what works, just make sure that they're actually doing it correctly and they're not actually like bearing down as well, is what my big tip would be when it comes to bracing. Okay. So just a little quick kind of infographic when it comes to the anatomy for women. Okay, just really quickly, majority of the time when someone or if a woman comes in with back pain or hip pain, I will always check the pelvic floor and see what's going on there. I will ask for their women's health history. And that goes from, have you ever been pregnant? If you have, how many pregnancies, how many births? They are two very different things. If, what their history with training is, whether or not they are still menstruating, do they have regular cycles? Is it heavy? Is it painful? What are their symptoms during their period? Are they on any contraceptives? There's a lot of questions that I could probably go down, but I take a very thorough history of women's health, because what their women's health subjective history would then tell me is whether or not any of the above, like whether or not they've got period pain or pregnancy or any trauma to the pelvis or the coccyx, anything like that will give me an indication as to whether or not the pelvic floor has a bit of an involvement in any of their hip or their pelvic or their back pain, because of just how closely the pelvic floor is linked to everything else in the spine, the core, the hips. The other thing that I would also do is for someone with pelvic pain to see whether or not it's a pelvic floor related issue is I also check their jaw, weirdly enough. There's actually a bit of a fascial link between our jaw and our pelvic floor. So if you have a tight jaw, you're clenching, you're a grinder, chances are you will most likely also have a slightly hypertonic pelvic floor too. So I also check the jaw, and when I ask questions about the jaw, I also go into how your stress levels, how are your anxiety levels as well, because women carry a lot of stress and anxiety in our shoulders, teeth, and our pelvic floor, or our center. So those are the main areas that we would carry more stress and anxiety. Okay. So pelvic floor and back pain and pelvic floor and hip pain. Like I mentioned before, it is just so important to flag that if you've had back pain in the past or hip pain in the past, and you've gone and seen every practitioner under the sun, it helps. You do your rehab, it comes back. You go again, and it's like rinse and repeat. There has to be a missing link, because there's only so many dead bugs in the world that you're going to be able to do. And you have to then go, right, is it actually my core switching off, or is there something else that is kind of at play here? Is there something else that's actually the cause and everything else is just on overdrive, which then forces my back or my hip to work so much harder that it's creating pain? So that's the reason why I really want to highlight how important the pelvic floor is when it comes to the whole body, but as well as for training, for anyone that just exercises, and for performance as well, because one wrong technique or one wrong breathing technique, one wrong bracing technique, one wrong slight little movement or compensation, that's when something else is going to kick in. So you want to understand, especially for women, in my space, especially for women, what is their pelvic floor doing in those movements, in those exercises? What is it doing? So a lot of the time I will get them to squat, I will get them to deadlift, I will get them to do the movement that causes them pain. And I want to see what's moving. I want to see what muscles are turning on, what's not turning on, and then also kind of narrow it down from there. But yes, quick self-assessment for actually men and women really. Do you have any pelvic pain? Do you get low back pain or hip tightness with certain movements? Can you lift your pelvic floor muscles whilst in your exercises? Like, can you actually feel it? Are you aware of it? And if you are you able to differentiate between a squeeze, relaxing, and a push? And And can you see signs of straining when you're activating your core in the mirror? So where do you see the straining? If it's upper or nothing else moves and your butt's clenching, then that's something that's telling me that we need to teach you how to brace properly and actually investigate to make sure that your pelvic floor then doesn't kick in to help support that. Okay. When to look for help. So like we previously mentioned in this webinar, if you've got back or hip pain that lingers or continues to return despite seeking allied health treatment and rehab, incontinence, either urine or fecal, or urgency. So urgency is a little bit different. So urgency is more of, oh my God, I need to go now. That feeling of needing to go to the bathroom and then just needing to go right then and there. Otherwise you're going to leak, or you feel like you're going to leak. Painful periods, painful intercourse. On the painful periods, if you're someone who has painful periods but also struggles to use a tampon purely because it's too painful to insert, that's also something to flag as well, to see a women's health physio to help you kind of navigate why that is. The inability to differentiate between activating and pushing or lengthening your pelvic floor, and management of pelvic pain related conditions such as endometriosis, PCOS, or musculoskeletal conditions. Okay. But yeah, to our Q&A.
What would be your number one, if you had to pinpoint one exercise specifically to influence positive pelvic floor, I guess, awareness, besides the ones you showed us? Do you have a number one?
In terms of like being able to feel your pelvic floor?
Correct, yeah.
Yep. And I usually, to be honest, I usually use the one I demonstrated on the chair as just a bit of a basic one. The other one that I do tend to use is, especially for those who leak, for example, who do leak and it is maybe a superficial pelvic floor issue. If it is a superficial pelvic floor issue, what I do tend to give clients is, and everyone knows what this feels like, because I don't think I've ever met anyone that has never been in this position. But I usually tell them, and this is the cue I tell them, either imagine that you're holding in a fart, or imagine that you really need to go to the bathroom to do a number two, but you hate public toilets and you're holding that poo in. Those are probably the two cues that I do give to help to activate superficial pelvic floor. And
so you're saying someone with a better pelvic floor can hold a poo in for longer?
Probably, yes.
All right.
Yep. Yeah. Richard, you can attest to the fact that you do not have a good pelvic floor because you have to go to the bathroom a lot, right?
Repeat one more time, sorry.
You can attest that you have a weaker pelvic floor because you go to the bathroom a lot?
Yes. I'm currently working on it. No problem. But yes, you definitely don't want to have that where possible.
But yes, that is essentially, yeah. So that's actually one of the exercises I do give out. And that's like a pretty common cue that I do give if I need to help clients to gain a little bit more awareness of their superficial pelvic floor.